Right, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to members of the public. Good evening to councillors and officers here this evening. This is the Scrutiny Panel on the 17th of August 2021. And I must go through the housekeeping first. There are no practice evacuations planned for the Town Hall this evening, but if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the Town Hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street, whichever is appropriate, and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in St Runwald Street. The COVID risk assessment has been undertaken for this meeting, and a number of safeguards and precautions are in place, including social distancing, but masks are not needed, but can be used when when moving seats. This meeting is being streamed live over the internet on the council's website and through the YouTube channel, and will be available after the meeting. Discreet use of mobile phones and other devices is welcomed, but you are requested to set them to silent and to not use voice or camera flash functions. We may have a break at 7:30, subject to the progress of business. So I'm Councillor Mark Corey. I'm chair of this panel, the Scrutiny Panel, and I'm a representative of Wivenhoe Ward. I'll invite councillors and officers to make introductions, and I'll go to my right.
Good evening, I'm Richard Block, Assistant Director for Corporate and Improvement Services and Senior Management Team Support for the panel.
Good evening, Tina Bourne, Councillor for Greenstead Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Julie Young, Greenstead Ward.
Good evening, Lynn Barton, Shrub End Ward.
Good evening, I'm Matthew Brown, Economic Development Projects Manager, Colchester Borough Council.
Adrian Pritchard, Chief Executive.
Derek Loveland, Tiptree Ward.
Barbara Wood, Tiptree Ward.
Dennis Willits, Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
Nigel Chapman, Rural North Ward.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you all, and thank you, Councillor Julie Young, for substituting this evening. You're substituting for Councillor Lorcan Whitehead. Those are the only substitutions I am aware of. Item 3, urgent items. There are no urgent items scheduled for the meeting unless I get told otherwise, Owen? No. Okay, declarations of interest. Can I have any, please, councillors? No, okay, I suppose the only interest I would say is I was a former board member of the Town Deal Board and also as an Essex County Councillor. They will be mentioned in the discussions this evening as well. Item 5, the minutes. Can I ask those who were here present at the last meeting to approve those minutes or to point out any inaccuracies on the minutes? Councillor Barton?
Yeah, could I just make one comment? I did ask for a review of allotments and the policies and the allocation of allotments, and was told that I'd get some sort of feedback from whoever's responsible, and just to say that I haven't received anything as yet, and I would like that to be followed on, please. Thank you.
So thank you, Richard. If we could chase it up on allotment policies, please, through the relevant officers and portfolio holders. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Barton. Apart from those, can we agree the minutes as accurate enough? Thank you. Agreed. Thank you. Item 6, general have your say. There are no speakers under this item, but there are other have your say speakers on following items. Item 7, decisions taken under special urgency provisions. There are no such decisions taken for us to scrutinise. Item 8, cabinet or portfolio holder decisions called in for review. There are none. Item 9, A and B, items requested by members of the panel and other members. Well, effectively item 10 is that. So we have no other items requested. So we move to item 10, which is the main item on the agenda tonight, which is the Colchester Town Deal, and looking into how we properly scrutinise the Town Deal and the moving forward of that process and the spending of the money that we have received from government. I have two have your say councillors this evening via Zoom, Councillor Scott Buttell and Councillor King. I think it's probably best that we listen to them and then we go Sorry, Owen.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman. Councillor King is yet to join us, but Councillor Scott Butell is waiting and ready to speak.
Okay. All right, well, I'll take Councillor Scott Butell and then we'll see if Councillor King arrives. If not, we will go straight to the presentation and ask Councillor King to wait. So Councillor Leslie Scott Butell, please take the floor.
I'm taking the floor, Councillor Corey. I'd just like to start off by saying that the record of youth position is not one that the Conservatives at Essex County Council can look back on with any sense of pride or achievement. I'd like to talk a little bit about Stanway. I mean, Stanway had a youth centre. It was a purpose-built youth centre, and it was open every night of the week, run by youth workers. Then the cuts came and it shut because there were not enough youth workers left to operate it. I worked with local volunteers and we reopened it one night a week. I was concerned that this solution was not sustainable. And although the volunteers were dedicated and excellent, life moved on. And during COVID, the decision was made that they could no longer sustain this any longer, and it closed. The only way to reopen this is by Essex County Council to staff it. And can they? Can the town deal actually fund reopening the Stanway Youth Club? I know that they were looking to reopen or to operate out of town centre and more rural youth facilities. As I said, we've got a purpose-built building here. But as I said, the only way it can be reopened is by having youth workers. And I just can't see that Essex County Council, having made the cuts, will be able to reintroduce the workers that are needed for this. You know, the funding has been cut. The youth zone will play a major part in helping that to change. It's needed, it's vital. It reaches more of our young people than Essex County Council Youth Services ever can, because the age range that are allowed to attend is far greater. You're not allowed to go to an Essex County Council Youth Club unless you're over 13, whereas the youth zones, you can start from age 8, which is great, because that helps the transition from primary school to senior school. So I just think it's so terribly, terribly important. I'm just looking where I am. Bear with me for a sec. The age range is greater. I've worked in the townhouse supporting the youth council when we actually had a Colchester Youth Council, and even then the townhouse was totally inaccessible to me. And it was challenging. It was challenging, but I did it because I really wanted to, and I thought it was important. The spending on the townhouse that they talk about in the deal, it's a unicorn. The building, its location, its whole being was outmoded 40 years ago. It just isn't fit for purpose. It really isn't. The report is tactically vague. And actually, it could be viewed as a substantial waste of taxpayers' precious resources to spend money on this building. What does it actually mean? There's not enough detail there. And to conclude, I mean, the council leaders, they must do the right thing. They mustn't be over-influenced by their colleagues at Essex County Council. Every one of them was elected by Colchester, in Colchester, for Colchester. They need to move heaven and earth to do the right thing. Colchester and I, for one, will be watching very, very closely. We as a town, we really need a youth zone, and I can't see any acceptable alternative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott Butell. Some questions to pick up there within the presentation. I won't ask anyone to necessarily speak to that now, but we have the rationale within the paper around the youth theme, and I understand why Councillor Scott Butell's asked more of those questions, because we aren't answering them in the paper, but I'm sure officers will help to answer those as we go forward. Have we got Councillor King yet, Owen?
No, I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, it doesn't appear that he's been able to join us yet.
Okay, we will return to him. Please let me know if he does turn up on the digital connection. So we'll move to the presentation then. So thank you to Matthew in particular coming along, and to our sort of board members in a sense. Adrian, I can't remember if you're an official board member or not, but we have the independent chair as well, Simon Blacksall. So we have 3 participants who are going to help us this evening, but I believe, Matthew, you begin with the presentation, is that correct?
Chair, I know that Matthew has put the report together, but I just wanted to do some short introduction for you, if that's all right. Can I invite Simon Blacksall to come to the table as well as the independent chair of the Town Deal Board called We Are Colchester Board? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Come and join us, Simon, please. Just while that's happening, Chair, just to say, I felt that it was important that I did attend on the basis that the Town Deal Board was put together under the previous administration, political administration, and completed its work to the extent of putting in a bid and then waiting for the outcome of that bid to government under the current administration. So I felt that I should be here. I'm afraid I don't believe Councillor Dundas can be. He is away on holiday at the moment, I think, unless I'm told he's virtual. Well, that's even better then, so that's good. Just to say, Chair, I'm sure that the panel have read the report. I'm not going to take you through the report. You will know that we were fortunate to be one of 101 towns across the country to be able to bid for £25 million worth of town deal funding, which is what we did. And we were asked quite clearly by government to put together a governance arrangement that had an independent board of not just local authority representatives, both politicians and officers, but also a range of other representatives such as Simon, a local business person who chairs the board, and together with the voluntary sector, community sector, other businesses in Colchester, and I hope some big playing partner organisations, such as, for example, Homes England, who could well come to the table and provide significant funding on top of the potential £25 billion that we were bidding for. Just to say, you'll know in the report that we were not successful in 25 million, but we were allocated 18.2 million. We had identified our projects for £25 million worth of funding, and you'll see those in the table in the report itself. We had to actually look at reprioritising to get it back from 25 million to 18.2 million. We did try to talk to government officials to say we'd really like to hold on to our £25 million programme, and could we allocate some money to some projects rather than all that was needed, and they were very clear to us that the answer was no. You must identify projects for the £18.2 million and make sure that you can deliver those projects. So effectively, that was what we were instructed to do. And that is what the board had to do. So we looked at a set of criteria that again is in the report to try and reprioritise those projects to come to a total of 18.2 million. And you'll see in the table, it identifies for you all of the projects in terms of what the initial ask was, and then how we prioritised to get to a total of 18.2 million. That's clearly in the table for you set out. And I absolutely accept that the youth services and youth zone issue was an issue. We felt that we were not in a position to be able to identify to government that we could deliver that. At the time, we had to put in our bid for £18.2 million. We did not have revenue funding. It is in our medium-term financial forecast, which is for 23-24 and for 3 years, 23-24, 24-25 and 25-26. But actually, the money is not available in that we have got to find corresponding savings in order to find that resource. And it was felt that we had not found those savings. I'm not saying that we couldn't find them. I'm saying that at the time we had not identified savings equivalent to replacing that money for the revenue costs of a youth zone. So we certainly couldn't deliver that at the time of having to go back to government. We also at that time did not have a site, and we still don't have a site that's acceptable to Onside, who are the partner that were going to bring a substantial amount of money and actually help operate the youth zone itself. So there were clearly two significant conditions that we felt we were not in a position to be able to satisfy at the time of going back to government. I know the board thought about that along with a range of other programmes in there. So you will see other projects that were either not funded at all. So, for example, some of the livable neighbourhoods were not funded at all. That was on the basis that actually we felt that we would look to see if we could find some funding elsewhere for those projects. So that was, for example, the Levelling Up Fund, which is another big fund that we're able to bid for from government in June of next year. So actually looking at how we could include some of those other projects that we just could not fit into the 18.2 million. So it wasn't just about the youth zone, it was about other projects and actually trying to take a view about, could we hold on to the whole £25 million programme because it's a long-term vision, but actually we have got to allocate 18.2 million to specific projects. So that's what we attempted to do and took that to the board of We Are Colchester, who had a range of discussions and agreed the list that you've got in front of you. I'm very happy, Chair, to take any questions, obviously, and Matthew will certainly pick up any issues for you specifically. But again, just to pick up Councillor Scott Boutell's one of her questions around, will the town will Essex County Council fund staffing for certainly the youth centre in her ward or other youth centres? All I would say is the town deal was never going to do that. The town deal is a capital programme. It's about putting buildings, improving buildings, developments into Colchester, the town, and then looking at how we can lever in further monies from other agencies and organisations, and continuing the discussions that we will have with other partners to see if we can increase revenue funding for staffing of these particular projects and programmes. So I hope that's given a bit of a context, Chair, and tried to pick up one of Councillor Scott Boutell's questions around that. Chair, I won't go into any more of a presentation. I will leave it there. Happy for any of us, I'm sure, to take questions. As I say, the chair of the board is here for you to ask questions, as is Matthew in terms of the specifics. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Matthew, have you got more to add in terms of the structure of the town deal and some of the items relating to the report?
Nothing further to add to what Adrian's just presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Simon, anything more to add?
I think I'd really just echo what Adrian said, really. We bid for 25 million, we were offered 18.2 million, so we had to look at what we could do. We established 4 criteria by which to judge the projects, which is set out in 4.5. The projects were represented to the board on the 8th of June so that we could make a submission on the 14th of June. Projects, again, are, as was stated, all set out in 4.6. The youth zone was specifically discussed, and as Adrian said, as was presented at the time, there were issues in regard of both the site and revenue. So while we very much wanted the youth zone to remain within, and it's still in the tip, it hasn't been abandoned if there's money that we can source from elsewhere. And as Adrian commented earlier, the purpose of the town fund is so we can go and leverage other sources of money. But all we could do at the time was make a decision with the information that was presented to us, and the board voted unanimously, and I believe responsibly, to at that point not pursue the youth zone in the way that we had initially hoped if we had had 25 million. I think probably that's all I can say at this point.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the three of you for being here. I'm sure there's lots of questions to come. We wanted to deal with this item in 2 ways. First of all is to understand and to understand what our role is as a council and what our role is as a scrutiny panel in the town deal, and understanding how the town deal works and how it goes forward and how we scrutinise the decisions and the role that we have, or the roles that we have in that town deal. We are the responsible authority, so we have financial risk. So there's a number of questions people might want to ask about that. So that's one section. And the next section, which has been touched on already, was about the youth provision and understanding why the direction away from a youth zone was taken, and therefore what impact would that have, and understanding, accepting that there is more detail to come, but understanding that decision. So I've seen Dennis, Councillor Willits indicate, and Councillor Bourne. So I'll go first to Dennis and then to Tina.
Yes, Chairman, in accordance with your wishes, I won't address the matter of the youth zone at the moment, because we're coming back to that, I guess, as a major issue for discussion when we've looked at the generalities. This is the first opportunity that I've had as a member of the Scrutiny Panel, or indeed as a member of the Council, to actually address and examine the question of the town deal. So there are some issues which I'm sure you as chairman and a previous representative on the town deal board will know, and perhaps may think some of my questions are rather naive, but I will ask them all the same with your kind permission. The first one is that the town deal board has styled itself "We Are Colchester." But when you look at the area map in which these activities are taking, and you'll find that on page 23 of the formal bid document, you'll see that there has been a very narrow definition of what is the town. In fact, the villages that I represent, the village I live in, when I was a boy, was not actually part of Colchester. It was part of the Winstree rural district. And I suspect, looking at some of this documentation, that many people believe that my village is still part of the Winstree rural district and is not part of Colchester. And it's this narrow definition which I would like to ask about in the first instance, because what we're looking at are projects for a little bit of Colchester. You know, we are a little bit of Colchester. We are not the totality of Colchester. And it's quite clear that the underlying thinking about the essential issues of planning, of skills, enterprise, and particularly connectivity, has not been rolled out to consider the problems of those places which are more than 3 kilometres from Jumbo. Now, there may be good reasons for this, but I would like to hear a definition of what they are. If one looks at the government's prospectus, for instance, which defines the general rules for these projects, it says lead councils will define the area of the town deal. And there's a caveat which says subject to the ONS definition of towns being respected. So clearly, we could, if we had wished, considered the whole of the borough of Colchester as part of the beneficial area for these projects. And as I've said, and I will repeat, there are areas in terms of connectivity and broadband, there are some atrociously poorly served areas in the borough, perhaps not in the town, but certainly in the borough, where we could have made a really good argument that they should have been included in the bid for town deal funds. You could also argue that they should be included in the bid for several other government projects that are going around. But nevertheless, I asked the question, Chairman, why they were, why we have this particularly narrow definition, and why other areas are not going to benefit from the 18 point something million. My second comment is on the governance structure, because the clerk sent out a helpful note today saying that there's no formal requirement from government to establish mechanisms to undertake further overview and scrutiny of the town deal board per se, which of course causes one worry when we sit on the scrutiny committee. But when, again, we go back to the prospectus and look at clause 219 of the government's perspective, it says that there shall be alignment with the lead council or the accountable bodies governing standards, policies, and presumably our constitution, which requires that any significant sums of money passing through the council's accounts should be open to scrutinisation by the members of the committee. So I would just like to put my positive view that I believe the rules which government has attached to town deals gives us the same right to scrutinise in every detail that we do with any other council projects. And when we read on later that in regard to the money, there has to be cabinet accountability and sign off of all the cash, and that we bear the risk on many of these, it is clearly right and proper that there should be full scrutiny and ongoing scrutiny of this particular project by the Scrutiny Committee and Council. My third point is that, again, the government prospectus says that the town deal board is an advisory function to the lead council, which I think, if that is correct, sets into the proper context the overall responsibilities and scrutiny responsibilities for this project. So those are my immediate reactions to the presentation that we've had and the paper we have before us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Those are all helpful questions. The first one, I suppose, I can help with, and I'll go then to Adrian to help answer. And then I'll go to the other questions as well. Absolutely from my understanding, we were given a footprint by government, by the department to work with. And therefore we worked exactly with that. And it was interesting how, I'm not sure if it had influences from MPs, but it definitely goes further westward than it does eastward. And it goes towards Stanway. So I agree with you. I would have liked to have seen it go further. Coming from Wivenhoe, I would have liked to have seen it touch upon all parts of the borough, like you as well. So I will go to Adrian shortly to help us answer that question. I think you're right as well. The scrutinisation or the scrutiny of this project should go under the same rules as we apply as a council. And especially as we are the responsible authority, then absolutely the spending needs to be scrutinised as we go along. And you make an interesting question or point on the third about the advisory function of the board for the lead council, which I believe lead council would be our role, but I'll happily hear whether we take that role jointly with Essex County Council, whether we are the lead council. Adrian, can you answer those questions, please, along with Matthew?
Chair, let me just defer to Matthew on the definition in terms of the map itself and the town deal area, and I'll come back to the governance bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. So just to confirm what Councillor Corey stated earlier, absolutely correct. The boundary was set by government. It was based on ONS 2015 data. And it looked at the urban area of Colchester, and that was set. We had no influence. The town board had no influence over that. So essentially, you've got an area that spreads from Copford in the west to Greensted in the east, through to sort of Milan in the north, down to Monkwick in the south, and it's the urban area they're in which is the subject of the town deal. Thank you. I'll pass over to Adrian for the next part.
So Chairman, effectively, we had no say, no influence in it. We were told that is the town deal area and boundary, I'm afraid. In terms of governance, I think Councillor Willits is quite right, as is the chair of the Scrutiny Panel. It is right and proper for us to ensure that constitutionally we take the right decisions, don't we? And that scrutiny plays a part in those executive decisions. So from our point of view, we would certainly be saying that Cabinet, as the accountable body, we are the accountable body, Colchester Borough Council, must sign off business cases to go to government for the money. We still have not had the full 18.2 million. You will see in the paper that we've had 5% of it to do some enabling work. If you want to take forward certain projects and programs, you need some resources to do some enabling work, to do some research, to do some concepts and the like. And I think government finally have recognised that that's really important for local authorities. But clearly the business cases are starting to be prepared now. They are not due into government until April of 2022. And we will certainly be working towards completing those well in advance. I would suggest that we would be around the December, January time, and that the board of We Are Colchester Town Deal Board would look at those in February, ready for submission into a government for April to say, will you now please give us the full 18.2 billion against each of these projects, please? I think it's absolutely right that the Cabinet, because we are the accountable body, have to sign off that decision, because we are now about to request and spend money against those projects. And therefore, Councillor Willetts is quite right that the scrutiny panel or the call-in procedure, depending upon the most appropriate, should be a part and parcel of that scrutiny process. So we will certainly be bringing information to you as a scrutiny panel if you request it, but certainly the decisions will go through Cabinet or portfolio holders. And I would suggest at 18.2 million, it would be appropriate to go through Cabinet for us to be able to put those individual business cases forward in totality to government for that money.
Thank you, Adrian. There was the third point about the advisory function and who is the lead authority, but I'll just go to Dennis and then come back. Dennis, was it just on one of those points?
Yes, I think we do need clarification about what happened in terms of government definition or government advice on what the map should be, to ensure that we haven't had the wool pulled over our eyes. If I can read from the prospectus says the lead council, that's us, should define the area the town deal board will represent on the map. As a default, this should use the boundaries defined by the Office of National Statistics in their recent article, and it goes on to the article. And if you read the article, it doesn't actually define what it is. So government was saying that as a default, the boundary will be whatever ONS says, but that doesn't say that we have to accept it, Chairman. That just says it's a default. So if we have a good argument that, for instance, Colchester is quite a large area. It has places like Mersey and Tiptree, which are some way removed from the stress zone where all the drinking and debauchery takes place, but nevertheless still has significant issues which are associated with Colchester as a borough. And I just wonder, were none of these arguments put back, or did we just lie on our tummies and say, tittle it, government, we'll fall in with whatever you say? I would like clarity on how this decision was made, because certainly reading the prospectus, it does say by default this shall happen. But the fact that it says by default means that there are other options open if we wish to argue them. So did we not argue for a wider purview going out to the major centres of population within the borough?
Adrian, please.
Chairman, I'm happy to defer to Matthew, who will be very clear for Councillor Willetts.
Thank you. So I think my response to that would be that we were offered the £25 million with that boundary, as you quite rightly say, with the scope to sort of challenge and ask the question of minor adjustments. My point would be that we had to deliver the most impact outcomes that we could within that £25 million and the critical mass across those 6 intervention themes. So the specific things that Town Deal will fund, and to deliver that with the most impact and the most synergy across those themes, the town centre and the urban areas, you're going to get your highest population, the highest traffic. All of those things are mostly urban.
Thank you. I think the clue is probably in the title as well, it being the town, and it wasn't a borough deal. But from our point of view on the board, I can say as a board member, and Simon was there as well, that was very clear to us that that government had set this boundary, and we went with that. Adrian, was there on point 3, the advisory function Dennis asked about, and the lead authority? Are we lead authority or are we joint with Essex? How does that sit?
Chair, as the Borough Council, we're the lead authority as we are the accountable body for the spend.
Thank you. At this point, I'll move on, but Dennis, if there are any further questions, please come back. Just before I go to you, Councillor Bourne, if you could please hold on. We have Councillor King now, and have your say section usually comes first. So I will ask if Councillor King can hear us, and if Councillor King can unmute and take part. Hello, David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. My apologies to the committee and crowd watching that I was becalmed with a puncture, but I am here. My air is in my own tyres. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and have your say. And my apologies, I come into your meeting. I just wanted to talk about one issue, which is the youth zone. But before I did so, and my apologies if some of this has been covered before, I just wanted to add, if I could, Chair, to what I've just heard, as I was so deeply involved in the process and the decision making. It's absolutely as described by Matthew. And the one thing I can add to that succinct description is that this was a very open process, a very wide involvement cross-party, involving many stakeholders. This was not a surprise. It was all about getting the most bang for buck in support of the We Are Colchester board. Now, to the youth zone itself, this was one of those classic illustrations of where the principle of town deal could be borne out, because it brought with it a great deal of amplifying funding, some of it from government, as well as a revenue cost share and a long-term philanthropic support, both for the prospect, the project, and all that followed in terms of helping the life outcomes for young people in Colchester. And I'm so keen to make sure that we together work this through yet, as the paper suggests we might, that I won't make a big deal, and I could, of what to me are discrepancies in the paper's summary description, because there was a big shift from where we were in May before we left as the last administration, where absolutely the parties understood that it wasn't an illustration, it was the intent to secure a youth. So that was understood by all of us, and all parties, including County Council, understood the additional investment, that principle, the town deal, the amplification of investment that would secure. Now, we are, however, where we are. So 2 points, and then a sort of question which needs conversation. The 2 points, simply put, are this: that if we understand what is at stake here, the loss of investment and the longer term support, we will do all we can to try and make this happen. And I want to ensure that to do so, we don't make this, as we could, a point of division between parts of Colchester and the politics of Colchester. So I simply want to say to the new administration that for my part, and I hope for colleagues as well, I really welcome all cross-party work we can do to secure a Colchester youth zone for the benefits it will accrue. Here's my question, however, a challenge. When we look at where money has gone, which increases the challenge if we are to deliver between us a youth zone, we are left with a really big question about how that decision was made, about the cost and benefit analysis, about what will happen with the townhouse alternative, which I assume will still continue, and what young people were consulted. Some of this yet could be a gap that could be filled if that investment is locked in. But at the very least, we need, Chair, and ask the committee to do what it can to explore this, to understand where the money will go, what the outputs will be, whilst we work cross-party and together to secure a youth zone for the people of Colchester. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. We'll come back to your comments really because they mainly address the youth zone, but thank you for your contribution about the context of the Town Deal Board, your role in it as well as Chair of the Advisory Board underneath the Town Deal Board. So thank you for that. Councillor Bourne, thanks for your patience. Over to you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. I'm known for my patience. Actually, I do agree with quite a lot of what Councillor Willits was saying in that this is a new role for scrutiny. We often scrutinise all sorts of projects that the council is involved in. Obviously, we're very interested in how the money is allocated, where it's been spent, if there's any underspend or overspend. So we're used to that as a scrutiny panel. We're also used to scrutinising monies that are afforded to the council as account holders, like the Mercury Rising project, where we were fund holders for that, the Rough Sleepers initiative, where we've been fund holder for millions of pounds. But those are wholly held within the council as a unit. This is slightly different and may go on. This may be the start of the way that the government are going to allow funding through local authorities in future. So this is the first on a different track. So I think it's important we get it right here and we understand how the various organisations work together. The accountable body, us as the lead authority, it's very clear in the guidance, you can only have one lead authority and that will be us. The release of monies and the sign off by Cabinet should be a full and proper sign off, not a yes. It should be all laid out in the report, obviously, goes without saying. Good to hear that that's going to come forward in business cases, possibly in February. And I know that the previous chair, Councillor Corey, in Councillor Bentley, was very keen on pre-scrutiny. And I wondered whether there was a role for us as a panel, because it's early days at the moment. The business cases haven't even, probably the templates aren't even started yet. Whether there was a role for us and possible recommendation at the end of this meeting that we look at pre-scrutiny in February, because otherwise we'll be doing it after the horse has bolted. And then I'm unclear as to this panel's recommendations that we make, because we normally make recommendations to Cabinet and Cabinet can choose to ignore those recommendations. But we've been making recommendations to Cabinet and we are Colchester, the independent board, could choose to ignore those too. So I think for clarity purposes, I as a panel member of this scrutiny panel need to understand where exactly our role fits into this. We're very clear on a panel where the annual scrutiny comes in for Colchester Borough Homes, the Amphora suite of companies, we're clear on those, but I'm not so clear on this. And I think going forward, if this is the way that central government are going to allocate funds through local authorities of fund holders in future, I think it's important that we get that sorted out. Really pleased, Chair, that we had a spokesperson's meeting last week to tease out some of the additional information regarding this report and the nuances around the Town Deal settlement, and to clear up any misunderstandings that we had around that, and that that CBC are going to look at the clarity of the roles of the accountable body, the independent board, we are Colchester, and project assurance function, and going to produce a diagram showing how these parts fit together. And I think visual representation is always very helpful when we're talking about different organisations. So I'm pleased with that. I have a question around the business cases and any conflict of interest. The guidance, the Town Deal guidance that's provided by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government states I mean, it's obvious there are going to be conflicts of interest. You can't have stakeholders interested in the town deal project. You know, these are people that know what goes on in Colchester, know how business works, used to building project plans and delivering, without having any conflicts of interest along the way, and how those are sorted out and where the independence function comes in. So I was wondering, Matthew and Simon, how you were sorting that. How are you going to manage those conversations, and how are they going to be visible, that conflict of interest, not just in a register of interests? How is that going to be visible to everyone else? So that's my main thing. Can we do pre-scrutiny? Is that possible in your timeline? Do other panel members think that's a good idea or not? Is the release of monies and the sign-off by Cabinet going to be a full report that's open to either scrutiny or call-in? And even if there was a call-in, where would that go? Because it is an independent board for a reason. It's supposed to be independent. And the other query I had was around risk. If any of these projects can't be delivered, there's an increase in materials or capacity problems, or God forbid we have another pandemic, who holds the ultimate risk? And where is that? If it's Colchester Borough Council, where is that on our risk register? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Matthew or Adrian, please.
Chair, I'll let Matthew pick up a few of those points. I'd like to come back to the governance and scrutiny part, if that's right.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with Councillor King's questions in terms of the sort of, he was asking some questions about how, what steps were taken in terms of looking at the use and looking at that. And you mentioned cost benefit analysis. And what I would urge is that is something that happens as part of the business case process. And as you can appreciate, business cases are not yet ready. They're being prepared and work is underway. But as of June, when that decision had to be taken and submissions made to government, that work was not available. So it's just based on the best evidence and the best insight that we had. And I think in terms of how we might address the future of the remaining money that's allocated to youth, again, that will be for the business case to work out, but the intentions are look at and map existing projects, existing youth services and facilities, and where might capital investment help. That will happen at business case, so I wouldn't preempt that now, suggest that now, but that's how that will play out. You mentioned in terms of the business cases and how will we see the visibility, the conflicts of interests, and that side of how it will work for transparency. Just to reassure, there will be boards set up for those the themes. So if you take the 16 projects in total, they divide into 5 umbrellas or 5 themes. So you have town centre, Greenstead, youth, digital connectivity, and physical connectivity. The intention being that those, especially the larger ones, for which Greenstead is a good example, will have its own board. So it will have its own relationships with the key stakeholders, the ward members, key partner organisations such as health. They will have a board which will be chaired by, by an independent person to look at how those, what's happening. And that's where those things will be addressed initially. Any conflicts will be addressed there, but will come to town deal board as needed to resolve any disputes. And then finally, really in terms of the risk management, that will be the ownership, the accountability of Colchester Borough Council as accountable body. So we will be putting those business cases through quite a strenuous process, including Section 151 approval, as you'd expect for those large spends of money, and all the sort of general risk management, cost inflation, all of that work will be done at business case stage by colleagues. We've got groups within Colchester Borough Council, within our partner organisations, who are familiar with developing business cases. So that work will be done very rigorously, I would say, in due course. Adrian, anything further?
Thanks, Matthew. Certainly, I'd like to pick up the point from Councillor Bourne about governance and actually future government funding. because I have to say, I think I probably agree with her that the government have identified other funds, haven't they, and asked us to consider bidding for them. One of them is the Levelling Up Fund, of which, you know, there is potentially another further £20 million that could be bid for Colchester, and Essex County Council, I think, have an opportunity to bid for £50 million for transport. The problem is for that is £50 million for big transport projects doesn't go very far. It'd probably get you one or two big projects, and they have to look at the whole of Essex in terms of their bid. But again, there will be an accountable body for the Levelling Up Fund, for example. And I agree entirely that I think that's the way government are moving. There are a range of other funds behind that that are being talked about or being launched. And I think that it is absolutely right that we do make sure that the Borough Council, through its scrutiny function, is given the opportunity to scrutinise that and to have an input to it. So just coming back to this particular town deal fund pot, I would certainly say that I think, you know, as business cases are being developed, I think it's only right and proper that they should go to the board in terms of some initial look at, are they in the right place? Are they dealing with the right issues? Actually, board, you know, as and when we complete these, are you saying that you are currently supportive of that? I think it should then come to the scrutiny panel in whatever way, shape or form, whether it's pre-scrutiny, that would be a matter for you and or the cabinet to consider, but actually for you to then look at improving those business cases or challenging those business cases. I then think it has to go back into cabinet for sign off, because we are the accountable body to actually spend that money. And then I think it goes on to the board in the end to say, are we as a town board able to submit these business cases to government in this timescale? So that feels like a sensible way of trying to do that. And I think for other potential government funds, we should follow that type of model, if I'm honest, because I think there are other large projects and programmes coming through under this current government that we could bid for. I'm not saying we'll be successful, but we will always look to be successful in Colchester. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Just before I come back, Councillor Bourne, that was helpful. And Councillor Bourne did talk about call-in. So how would call-in procedures work with the scrutiny panel and with that decision making? What you've said is really helpful and understandable about pre-scrutiny. I just wanted to ask you that question.
Chair, my understanding is quite clearly if you pre-scrutinise something, you won't be able to call it in, you know, because you get the opportunity to pre-scrutinise it before the decision's taken. If the cabinet decided or a portfolio holder decided that actually, no, I'm going to take these individual projects and I'm going to make a portfolio holder decision, then the 5-day call-in period would apply, would it not? But again, I think these are very large projects. You know, some are 1 million, some are 6 million. You know, they have a massive impact and effect on the quality of life of some of our communities, picking up Councillor Willett's point about the geographical boundaries. And therefore, you know, it's only right and proper that they should be done in that particular way, in my view. And I think pre-scrutiny is a sensible thing to consider. But you can have the call-in procedure should a decision be taken for whatever reason.
Interesting. Okay, Councillor Bourne.
Do you want recommendations at the end, Chair?
Happy to take them as we go, but we will come back to them at the end.
Okay, then I'd like to put in the recommendation that we have a discussion with Cabinet, because this is slightly different. Discussion with Cabinet around pre-scrutiny or scrutiny of the business cases provided by We Are Colchester Board. Frankly, I don't really mind whether it's pre-scrutiny or scrutiny, but it's a tight timetable for everyone, even tighter for pre-scrutiny, I would say, before sign-off.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. Are you finished? Or?
There was something else. I'll come back to it later.
Okay, we will come back to you. No worries. I had been writing down those suggestions that we had so far, so definitely would take that as a working recommendation that we can get to at the end. Thank you. I next had Councillor Young and then Councillor Chapman. So Julie, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. My question is focused around some of the areas that haven't been identified to attract funding. So a number of those are particularly related to highway work. So we've got the St Botolph's roundabout, Vineyard Gateway, the curbless streets, livable neighbourhoods, and I think Adrian, you referred to maybe we could look to the Levelling Up Fund in terms of livable neighbourhoods. I guess my question, and I'm not really sure where this sits, whether that sits with the leader of the council or the chair of the board, is what work is being done in terms of identifying funding to help those projects, particularly around Vineyard Gateway and St Bottles, because they're strategically important for the development of the town. And they're certainly important to us in the previous administration. They've not been prioritised in the town deal funding. So how are they being developed or taken forward? If somebody can give some insight into that, I'd be very grateful.
Matthew, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Young. So I think with most of those examples that you've given, certainly St Botolph's, Vineyard, it's early days with Levelling Up Fund. And to be honest, we're still waiting to have confirmation of when the call is. It's probably June 22. It might be slightly earlier than that. But that is absolutely, that's, I think one of the rationales of actually reducing the funding in the town deal when the board had said decision was there's a very good chance that we can apply for Levelling Up funding, and also that does align really well with the intervention framework within Levelling Up Fund, which does include transport infrastructure. So the rationale was we've got a very good chance of going for that and getting it, whereas some of the other themes in the town deal, we wouldn't have been able to look for substitute funding. On livable neighbourhoods, specifically, there is one livable neighbourhood that will be delivered under town deal, the one in Greenstead, which will be integral with the Greenstead scheme. The intention that would actually serve as a pilot, and if that works well, and it becomes an exemplar, where again, if other funding becomes available downstream, we would then roll out other livable neighbourhoods elsewhere in Colchester, subject to other funding. So bear in mind, the town investment plan is a long-term vision. It actually, behind it's 2040. We can't do everything within town deal. Town deal itself, the funding has to be spent by March 26, but the ambition is much broader. And if other funding comes online over the course of that time, we will, of course, be bidding for further funding. Thank you.
If I could just come back for a moment. I hear what you say in terms of timescales, but the St Botolph's development was time critical as well. And I'm wondering, how that is going to be progressed now that we're not identifying the funding via the town deal, if we're going to look elsewhere at levelling up funds to support that work. Isn't that going to butt up against the fact that we've already sort of had two schemes developed at St Botolph's because the first one was unpopular? How are the timescales going to work in terms of the end date for that 106 agreement funding?
Chair, what I would say is I certainly can't give a specific answer to that. What I can say is the County Council are very, very clear about timescales, and we are having ongoing conversations and discussions about how the whole of that project can work and how they can either lever in further funding, whether it's from DFT, whether it's from Levelling Up Fund, whether it's from their own capital programme, etc. Certainly the spend of Section 106, certainly some help from the town fund, etc. And all I can say is those are very, very keen and clear discussions going on with Essex County Council, who see this as a priority, one of their priorities in Colchester. So I hope that gives some reassurance, and I'm absolutely certain that you will see more of that information as and when that becomes available.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Young. Next, I have Councillor Chapman. Nigel, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm getting somewhat more confused in certain respects on this one. Sort of around the whole scrutiny thing in a way. I do share that we do need to be, as a borough council, need to be involved. Somebody needs to be clearly scrutinising what's going on here. The other thing that's confusing me a little bit at the moment is around these business plans that are being made for various aspects, which from what I hear, the Borough Council will be drawing up. And I can't quite work out in my own mind about how the political decisions that the Borough Council make fit into how the town aspect that organisation responds. There must be at some stage going forward over the coming years, some discrepancy between how that body sees what is going on or what it wants to happen, and how the Borough Council, with a political will of its own, wants those plans to go forward. I cannot quite understand how those two things can be brought together. There must be, at some stage, will there not be some sort of clash between what the Borough Council wants to do and what the town deal organisation wants to do? And I'd like to understand how that could resolve itself. And the only other thing I wanted to know was, going back to some of the things that have been said earlier on, the sort of leverage, or leverage as I think it's called these days, how that's seen now that the fund has been reduced, as it were, 25 million is down to 18 million, how that leverage is, again, will that definitely come down in the same proportion, or will that leverage fund be a lot less and therefore upset the balance of the whole project? I'm not sure if I made myself very clear, but I'm confused around those two things, really.
Thank you, Nigel. It made sense to me, and I will ask about leverage shortly. But there's one question before I go to officers, just to help in my mind. We had a political appointee, being the leader of the council, as deputy chair, and a second deputy chair was a political appointee as the county council representative, typically portfolio holder to do with business, was appointed. And we had a political appointee as the chair of the advisory board, which fed in most of the sort of evidence gathering and the consultation of other partners. So I just wanted to ask where that sits currently and who those people are, and pass over to the officers for your first and second question on the political versus the board and on the leverage part.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. If I start with the leveraged point, the leveraged funding, this is something that obviously we were aware of when we had to take the smaller settlement, and we actually did a very quick piece of analysis of how much leveraged funding would be lost in taking the approach that was taken in terms of that prioritisation that's been presented in the report. The good news really is that the loss of leveraged funding is actually only 21% of how much leveraged funding we would have had everything proceeded exactly as our town investment plan, whereas the loss of funding was 27%. So we've actually managed to bring as much leverage funding as possible retained through the projects that remain in the overall programme versus the funding that's been lost. So yeah, that's good. That's the best outcome we could have hoped for at this stage, I think, on leverage. I'll just pass back to Adrian for the other points. Thank you.
Chair, I will certainly try to help answer the question about some confusion. I just think we live in a complex world, let's be honest. Government have prospectus, and then you read it and then actually it doesn't quite work like that, and you're told by civil servants actually you can do that but it won't count for anything. We live in a complex world. I have to say to Councillor Chapman that clearly we were asked to put together an independent town deal board. That's what we did to make sure that we had the credibility and the assurance from government that we were doing this in the right way. But as the accountable body, we still have to sign off that money, don't we? The town deal board is not accountable for the money in terms of its spend. So, if there is a conflict between the two, one, I would suggest that there shouldn't be, because we should be able to resolve it before we get there. But at the end of the day, it is the Borough Council that has to say, I am prepared to sign off that money. And if the Borough Council is not prepared to sign off that money, it will not sign off that money, I would suggest. And I would have thought the leader of the council, whoever the leader of the council would be, previous administration, current administration, future administration, the leader of the council and the resources portfolio holder would be very clear. It is still our ultimate decision to account for the finances. But I have to be honest and say, that was how government asked us to set this up, and that's how we set it up. And I absolutely understand Councillor Chapman's point about potential conflict. There is always a potential conflict. Like I say, at the moment, the board has worked extremely well. It has got political representation from both the county council and from the borough council. It has influence on that board, etc., like other board members, and therefore you would hope that you would not get to that particular point. But I can't give him a cast iron description of exactly what happens when there is a conflict. Sorry.
Can I just ask the question that I added in? Who is the chair of the advisory board now, and who is the county council representative on the board?
Thank you, Councillor Corey. We do not now have an advisory group. The reason being that, as I was saying slightly earlier on, that with those umbrellas of the programme, you've got those 5 groupings. The intention is that the people who were actively involved and contributing there will actually come back in if they're minded to, and support those individual boards at that level. So that, in a way, that was a requirement when the bid was being prepared, and it was a requirement as part of the consultation that had to be quite extensive before the bid and the town investment plan was submitted. But obviously now we're in a slightly different phase of the scheme, and so those people will now contribute with the programme boards. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. I'll come back with some further questions, but I've been informed that Councillor Dundas has indicated to speak. So, Councillor Dundas, if you are there, yeah. Paul, please.
Hi. Good evening. I hope you can hear me. I'm a little bit internet challenged this evening, and I'm running rapidly out of electricity, so I thought I'd just come in on this point. Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what's just been said. I mean, I think both myself and Councillor Corey have a lot of respect for the board. If you set up a board like this, as Councillor King mentioned, we have to be fairly determined in our minds to respect its decisions. I mean, I'll be absolutely frank. If I was given a blank piece of paper and sat down and said, which projects would you have come up with for the 25 million, or indeed had Councillor Corey been in the same situation, we might not have come up, or probably wouldn't have come up with this exact list. Again, had I just been sat down with a piece of paper, or which projects do you wish to prioritise the 18.2 million, I might have come up with something slightly different on behalf of CBC, as indeed we all might. But you have a number of different people there, and it has to be done by a process of negotiation, sensible negotiation, hard negotiation. There's a couple of things in there I'm not particularly keen. I'll be absolutely candid here. I'm not particularly keen on the Essex County Hospital money being prioritised. I would prefer that money to perhaps go on into youth services. But there are other people on the board, and you have to have the discussion and hopefully reach a sensible joint conclusion everybody respects and sticks to. And that's certainly what I intend to do. I can't comment on what's happened in the past, because it's an odd situation here, because Councillor Corey could probably be scrutinising himself this evening. To quote a line from a popular musical, or paraphrase it, he was in the room when it happened and I wasn't. But certainly going forward, it's certainly my intention, and I would hope anybody in the future, because this is quite a long project, this goes out over a number of years, and will go out over a number of different cabinet members and portfolio holders, I'm sure. I would hope that everybody will commit to respecting the board's decision and working in a positive, collaborative way, and that's certainly something I'll do.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. So I respect that you don't have much time, but I'll just come back with a question. You referred to being in the room. I wasn't in the room on June the 6th when decisions were made, and you were talking about things you didn't like. Can I ask, what did you speak up for at the meeting to ensure was in the funding application?
It was a very brief meeting, because I'll be absolutely honest, the decision had to be made the next day. As you're aware, when we came into power, we had about 8 days where most of the decision had been made at the previous meeting. There was little, in all honesty, I felt could be done without completely opening it up and risking losing the entire bid. And I simply was not prepared to have what would have probably been a fruitless argument and end up losing £18.2 million for Colchester. I didn't think that was a very sensible thing to do. So I did not do it. And as I say, I respected the board and I respected the decisions they'd already taken, and I felt that was the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dundas. Just some of my own questions, officers, hopefully you can help, and I'll ask Councillor Dundas for any more contribution. Matthew, you talked about detailed work being done on the leverage, sort of understanding of how much we could get in and understanding what we did have. You talked about 21%. How much of that 21% leverage was the loss of the youth zone funding?
Okay, so with the youth zone, just refer to my own notes if you don't mind. So the youth zone would have, had it gone ahead, would have brought in £2.1 million grant, potentially from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport Youth Investment Fund. And it could have, alongside the town deal investment itself, would have potentially brought in £4.2 million of private investment, private borrowing by Onside, the national charity. So that's whatever that's 6.3 million. Thank you.
So £6.3 million of leverage money was lost by not going with the youth zone.
What I would caveat that with is saying that the DCMS grant, the application hadn't been submitted for that. So, you know, whatever the probability is of securing that money, you know, yes, it may or may not have been successful.
So that would be a substantial amount of that 21% leverage funding that we did not lose, or we'd lost, sorry. Okay, I think the answer is yes. In terms of the funding that is being provided, the 1 million for the youth provision, how much leverage funding will come in with that?
We haven't prepared the business case yet, so I can't give you a sort of scientific answer on that at this stage. Sorry.
Okay. Where would leverage funding come in on that, do we think?
I don't know. It might be that there isn't any obvious sources of funding at this time, I would say.
Okay. Just because if we've done that detailed analysis, what I feel is when we or the board is making that decision, how much did they look into that? Because for me, taking out the emotive point about the youth zone and how brilliant many of us think it would have been, I just worry about the impacts and the loss of that leverage funding, and therefore what impact would the 1 million towards youth provision be? And I'm slipping into the second part of the agenda here, but it involves the leverage. And I would have asked this question, I should have asked it first really. What criteria did we use? What evidence was put in front of the board before they made that decision on the 6th of June? Because if we're talking about leverage, then losing the youth zone allocation was one of the biggest losses of leverage funding, the biggest in a substantial amount of money. How much thinking, evidence and research was done before those decisions were taken?
Chair, perhaps I can just put that into context slightly, that there is about 55 million pounds worth of leverage funding coming in against the 18.2 billion pound projects. That's not insignificant. I certainly accept that there was 6.3 million, I think, leverage funding that was not going to be attracted to Colchester under the town deal proposal when you take out the youth zone. That does not mean to say that money will not come in. As you rightly said earlier, actually the town deal board are still committed to the overall programme. And as you said earlier, you would hope that we would be looking to take steps to try and ensure that we can bring a youth zone to Colchester. And I know that the current administration and the leader of the council would also say he would be very satisfied and happy to work on trying to do that. So, you know, you're right, it's not part of the town deal, but we did and have got 56 million pounds worth of other leverage funding against other projects, which is far more significant in my view. And as I say, we could well still receive leverage funding if we can identify a site and we can look at the revenue funding of being able to run the youth zone itself. And those were two criteria that were not in place. And the government were quite clear, you must be able to deliver these projects as best you possibly can at the moment. And we were not in that place at that time.
Obviously, as leader of that former administration, I felt we had to prioritise the delivery of that revenue funding and felt that we could bring in other commitments from elsewhere, which were discussed with other partners, for example, the health authority. But that's clearly a political decision whether we fully commit to that revenue funding then and there. And if that did not happen or could not happen before the 6th of June, then that, I suppose, is political decisions, political influence. In terms of the first part of the agenda, I know I've slipped into talking about youth provision in the leverage part there. Are there any further points on our recommendation or action and decision 2.1 before we move on to the youth focus 2.2? Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask Simon, in your board makeup of, I think it's 12 on your board. Is it 12 people on your board? Depends, yeah. There's one person that doesn't seem to have been to any meetings so far, and I wondered if that was hampering your capacity or decision making. And is there anything you require from Colchester Borough Council that currently you haven't got that might ease your deliverability? That might be a
Sorry, who's the person who's not been at all?
I think it's someone from Homes England, although you have 2 people from Homes England, is that right? Yeah. It's quite a small board.
Just to help with that point of clarification on Homes England, what we've been advised by Homes England is, unfortunately, because Homes England is a subsidiary of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, it was seen that in the interest of fairness, impartiality, conflict of interest, it wouldn't be proper for that person to actually be a full-time standing member of the board. So they are not. But we do have a sort of local representation. There's basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is because of that conflict, they don't have voting rights. They can't be, that wouldn't be right. That would be a real conflict of interest and concern for government. Is that okay, Simon?
Thank you, Chair. That's exactly the kind of conflict of interest written down that I think we would appreciate seeing for transparency, because nowhere in any minutes have I been able to see that. So that would be useful to have. It's really, what does the ordinary person in the street think about We Are Colchester and the managing of the money and the risk? And it's not an insignificant sums of money that we're talking about here in projects spread around Colchester. So we want to make this work for ourselves and for you. And when I want to make that deliverability as good as it possibly can be. And if there's something that's missing, then here is the place to say that we can help. And there's 2 people, is that right, on the programme delivery side with the 5 themes. So you're going to manage those 5 themes between the 2 of you. I might have got that completely wrong.
The umbrella boards will each have a sponsor and an owner. So those groupings of projects. So for example, Greenstead, Youth and so forth, they'll have a sponsor and an owner. And those are executive directors within Colchester Borough Council and assistant director level for the owner. So those people will hold basically the management and the leadership of those groups, supported by colleagues in the Town Deal programme, like myself and other colleagues. So that's how that's being resourced and managed.
Okay, so we have our own internal high-level staff project sponsoring those, which is not an unusual, what we've done before with our programmes and projects. However, we are more unusually a bit stuck on capacity. So how does that help us with the other ordinary everyday work that everyone needs to do? What I'm saying is, are we certain there's no capacity issue here within the council internally in being on these boards? Our officers are on lots of other boards, lots of other partnership boards around the borough and in Essex. How can we be sure that we're not overcommitting people?
And Chair, I have to say that's about prioritisation in the same way it's prioritising £18.2 million rather than 25 million. It's exactly the same in terms of the Borough Council's resources. This is a high profile, significant amount of money with a number of significant projects. And actually that has been prioritised for the executive management team to take some of those sponsorships together with our senior managers, assistant directors who actually own the projects themselves. They won't be alone. The whole point is that we are looking at resources from Essex County Council. We are looking at resources from wherever else we can find them, whether it's Homes England, whether it's from Community 360, whatever it is in terms of that particular project. Those will be put together as boards to take forward the business cases. And that's what we have done, is prioritised our work at that level to make sure this is a priority going forward.
And then coming back on that, Chair, just finally, in which case I think the scrutiny panel should prioritise the scrutiny of the projects rather than the whole town deal. It may be easier to do it that way because of the timelines are not the same. So we ought to scrutinise the ones that are coming up first rather than spend a whole evening doing all 5 and dragging in virtually every member of EMT.
That's a helpful solution and something we should come back to when looking at the recommendation later. Owen, if we can think about that. Thank you. Thank you, Tina. Simon, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that because you kindly asked how the council could help. I mean, I'm not a politician. I think what you just suggested is a good idea, looking at projects. I got involved because I believe in Colchester. Your job, quite rightly, is to scrutinise and hold the board accountable. But I think, coming back to what you were saying there, we've got to look at the big picture because, to be honest, if we get buried in the detail, nothing will happen. I mean, £18 million is, yes, a lot of money, but it's designed as seed capital, as Adrian said, to go get a lot more. 18 million you can spend on pavements quite easily. And I think we've all got to have this vision looking 20, 25 years ahead. And that's where you quite rightly mentioned Homes England. Select and Homes England are potential sources of huge amounts of money. Councillor Corey has been on the board, and I'm pleased to say the momentum on the board has been really, really positive. And that's not least due to these guys. And so when you say, are they overstretched? They are. And they're doing a fantastic job, given that they've gone through this in COVID. Honestly, I'm not just saying that to butter these guys up. They are doing fantastic work. I think that needs to be recognised and they need to be supported. The board could not in any way succeed without the work that's going on behind the scenes. And I'll just stop there because I think we've got to pull together. I say I'm not a politician and I don't want to get involved in politics. We just got to pull together and look at the benefit for Colchester.
Thank you, Simon. That's really helpful, and thank you for expressing your gratitude for the involvement of our staff. And I know Matthew has had to work very hard on bringing it all together and work with council colleagues at Essex County Council as well. So I do echo the thanks, and I think we all thank the officers for being here tonight. And I want to thank you, Simon, as well, because you, as you say, you're not a politician, but you are in part here in our process and will be in time to come. But also we have to hold to account our politicians, and we will do that. But you are partly involved here, but thank you for coming and giving your time, for doing the role as the chair of that board, but also being willing to join us in the scrutiny within our rules. So thank you. Just a couple of questions that have come up in my mind just to finish off. And from Councillor Bourne's points, we have 2 officers directly employed through the revenue, in a sense, that is provided alongside the town board funding. Could you just outline that and reassure members on that, and what perhaps the term of employment is for them? Secondly, I'll go back to one of my questions, which was because I perhaps focused on something else and didn't let you answer, but how and what evidence was put forward for when the decisions were finally made on June the 6th? And thirdly, before COVID, we had some really good participation events, consultation in this room in particular with members of the community, partners, stakeholders and businesses. What further consultation happened prior to the final sign-off, and what further consultation may occur at any point along the next journeys of the final business plans?
Thank you, Councillor Corey. So in terms of the first question about the resources in the programme team, I line manage the programme manager, who's a full-time appointment, and there's a further engagement officer who's a part-time appointment. And they've been funded since the inception of the programme, around about February, March 2020, they came into post. And they've been funded initially through the capacity funding, which was a sort of one-off grant from government to enable the council to set up. So in other words, there is not any spare money in the council, as I'm sure people are aware, but in order to actually have those posts and to actually have that capacity to do the work that we're doing and to proceed at the pace we needed to, those posts were funded and will continue to be funded for some time. I don't really want to go into specifics about their contracts. That's not for this discussion, but as you appreciate, they are an asset to we need the capacity. We can't deliver it within existing resources. In terms of the evidence,
Matthew, if I just stop you there, sorry, I didn't want to put you on the spot about contract details. Absolutely not. I think the board would, the scrutiny panel would just like to know that government funding is there to continue on as long as we need it for those two roles and that capacity. So I hope that's the case.
Correct.
Thank you. Carry on, sorry.
Thank you. And you mentioned the evidence that was used to help with the decision-making process that were taken in June by board. You'll see in the report at 4.5 the criteria that was used, to do that. There was a piece of work done by myself and colleagues to look at that, to look at all projects and to try and make that assessment. And that was used as the basis of the recommendations that were made by officers to board in June. So that was based on some proper thinking and scoping. And in terms of consultation, the next steps plans, there is an engagement strategy for the Town Deal programme, which takes us through the current stages into the next stages and appreciating the role of those boards, those 5 individual umbrellas as we develop business cases. Absolutely, every single project and every single group will have a very, there'll be expectations and there will be commitments to continue to do further consultation and as we refine business cases. So appreciating a massive amount of consultation was done before the town investment plan was submitted, and that was great, that got us to there. And now we're kind of restarting our consultation, but more specific into those projects, and that will go on for the life of the programme. Thank you, Councillor Quinn.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, if the consultation feeds back that the public would like to revive one of the projects dropped, what is the scope for that to change? How would the board take that?
Chair, I think we've moved beyond that point. We are now quite clear that we've got 18.2 million. We have to put together business cases against those projects. And it is a government expectation that there will be an engagement strategy for those projects. Some will be much bigger and larger engagement exercises and activities because of the scale of the projects involved. Others will be smaller, but there is still an expectation of engagement. And that's why we have a part-time engagement officer as part of that 1.5 team, which is the Town Deal team that actually look to project manage the Town Deal. And so it will be now more on engagement of those projects and those delivery of those business cases.
Okay, thank you. It is now about 7:30. We've focused mainly on 2.1, and I think it's been really helpful for all of us here to understand. I know I had a bit more of a role in it, so understood most of it, but for most members of the council to understand it and to ensure that publicly we are discussing the different aspects of this and how we scrutinise it going forward. The risk management is really important. And actually, I think pre-scrutiny, which we'll later come to in the recommendation, will be really helpful. I know Councillor Wood often refined parts of the report in terms of financial items when we used to put those in front of scrutiny panels. And it's really helpful to get that detail, that eye for detail, put back to Cabinet and for recommendations to be made from here. So I suggest we take a 10-minute comfort break and come back at 22, so at 19:40, when we'll just finalise item 2.2 and look at the youth provision side and then finish up. Okay, Any dissent to that? No? Okay, see you shortly. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all for being back on time and ready to go with the remainder of the meeting, where we look a bit more at the 2.2 focus. It has been mentioned by Have Your Say speakers. We have touched on it briefly, but mainly understanding the youth provision element of the town deal. We do understand there is a further business case to come, but of course there have been discussions about a youth zone, a youth provision, the leverage or not of money and where we go with that youth focus, what it actually entails. Okay, are there any questions on that part of the agenda? Councillor Barton, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did want to say a few words about the youth zone. I'm afraid I'm not prepared to let it die a death because I think it's hugely important that we actually try and deliver this. Must admit, I was an employee of Essex County Council Youth Service for a number of years as a youth worker and as a training coordinator. And we had an excellent youth service and we had inspirational youth workers, many of which I trained, so I know they were really good. And suddenly the whole service is decimated. And Essex County Council were convinced that the whole service could be delivered by volunteers, which was never going to happen. It wasn't sustainable. And as you've seen over the years, it's actually died a death almost, youth provision in this town. So the fact that the youth zone was suddenly on the horizon, I thought was absolutely amazing and 100% behind it. I do understand that obviously there are concerns about the financial investment, but on the other hand, I just wanted to make a few observations. During the pandemic, all the youth zones throughout the country remained financially sound. Not one of them went under, and that's the first point. Secondly, we know we can attract significant match funding because it's already there, so we could deliver this youth zone. Looking at the data from all the youth zones in the country, there's huge benefits for our young people, and let's face it, they've suffered enormously during the pandemic. So I think it's even more important that we do provide top class services for them. The data shows significant drops in antisocial behaviour in towns that have a youth zone, reductions in crime, having immediate access to mental health facilities, huge benefits on people, and having this provision on one site. And I think we owe this to our young people. We have many key players in the town on board. I've spoken to people at the Mercury, the Arts Council, the Army, all absolutely supportive of this initiative. So I do have a couple of questions for Councillor Dundas, actually, whether he could confirm that he is still actively investigating suitable sites and where are we with that? You know, I know that's a huge problem, but is he really serious and actively investigating suitable sites? And secondly, can he confirm that he is having a dialogue with Essex County Council as the authority for youth service provision? I appreciate we do need them on board as the statutory provider. So where are we at with this? That's my points at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I know that Councillor Dundas has lost connection, so isn't here. So I wonder if, Adrian, if you can take back any of those, if there's anything in terms of an explanation to Councillor Barton's questions at this point you can give.
Chair, I'm sure that the Democratic Services Officer can ensure that Councillor Dundas gets those questions and responds not just to Councillor Barton, but to the Scrutiny Panel. I think they're perfectly pertinent and relevant questions to be answered. And I think, you know, as officers, we would agree that there are significant benefits in a youth zone. It's certainly been seen across the country in 13, 14, 15 youth zones of the benefits. Certainly, we would recognise that.
Thank you. I have Councillor Willits and then Councillor Young. So Dennis, please.
Yes, Chairman. It might be useful if we held these scrutiny sessions when either the chairman of the leader of the council or the portfolio holder for resources were not on holiday. I think whenever we have this sort of a session in August, we're at a disadvantage because people who should be here to answer many of the questions on behalf of the administration are whooping it up on the beach or tramping through the forests or running out of battery in some far-flung place. So I think that is a material consideration for Scrutiny Panel, that we will want to ask difficult questions of the political leaders of this council, and to have meetings when none of them are available because of holidays really puts us at a bit of a disadvantage in getting answers to many of the really pertinent questions which have come forward this evening. If we can turn though to the matter of the youth zone, I have considerable support. Councillor Scott Boutel in her presentation actually sort of said many of the things I would like to have said about the youth service. In the village where I live, we used to have a really good youth activity in the scout hut. Then someone climbed up on the roof and fell through it, and the building couldn't be used. The funding went elsewhere, and it's never come back. So it's not just in. I'm going to repeat myself on the issues of town versus countryside. It's not just in the town where there's a need for better youth provision. Across the whole of the borough, there is a need for better structuring the youth provision as and when funds are available. And of course, we all want lots and lots of things to do. We want everything that's on offer, but someone has to pay for it at the end of the day. I've been intrigued by some of the terminology that's been used this evening, Chairman, that we've actually lost the youth zone. In philosophical terms, we can't lose it because we've never had it. It was part of a bid. That bid did not materialize, so we've never actually had the ability, because we didn't have a site and weren't ready to go. We've never actually had it to lose. So I know it's a good political slogan to keep saying we've lost it, government has taken it from us, but in reality, it was never there. It has never been there. It may be there in the future, because this is not the only program, as has been said several times by the Chief Executive. Government is lining up to thrust money in our direction, and we just have to make sure that we hang the project of a youth zone onto the right convenient one that comes along at a time when we've got a site and can move forward on it without embarrassing ourselves by putting forward a business case to government, which we cannot do. And I think it is horses for courses, because when we look at the 6 major interventions which are defined for the town deal, I mean, just running through the list, if it isn't too boring: local transport, digital connectivity, regeneration, arts, culture, heritage, skills infrastructure, enterprise infrastructure. You know, nowhere in that list is the provision of youth zones, perhaps youth education, apprenticeships, lots of things which we could find a way of providing something for youth. But in terms of what I understand as, you know, the youth zone, it doesn't fit into any of the 6 major interventions which are defined for this project. So given that we don't have a site, I can well understand why it is that the youth zones are not going ahead as part of this particular project. And I think we just have to accept that, although I know members have passionate views about the need to proceed with the youth zone. Clearly, this is not the project that's going to do it. Clearly, Chairman, we must keep our eyes open and ready to pounce on the first project that comes along that will enable us to do it. And in the meantime, we must sort out the wretched issue of what we will use as a site to ensure that when the right project comes along, we are able to implement it, produce a business case which is capable of being run through, and that we eventually see bricks and mortar or its equivalent on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willetts. Were there any questions to recap for officers at all there, or were those mainly observations?
Those are principally my observations on why we just have to be disappointed on this case, because it's not the project that's going to deliver it.
Thank you. I would agree with the initial comments you made about youth provision being woefully inadequate. I volunteered and helped run a youth club in Wivenhoe, which we had a county council building that we rented out and paid the upkeep of, but they sold that off. So even when we have voluntary organisations running youth centres, they are sadly shut down and provision is cut. That first point you had, I disagreed with the second point about the terms of reference of the board and the objectives, because I think that a youth zone or better youth provision fits into a number of those categories about connectivity, about skills, and about regeneration, because how to regenerate a town comes from the bottom up and comes from a young age and further on. So I do think that it would have fitted in with this project, and I am disappointed it has not. Councillor Young, you were next, so Julie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to pick up on a couple of points that previous speakers have mentioned. I agree with Councillor Willits. It's very unfortunate that we haven't got any representatives from the Cabinet with us this evening, and I, acknowledge the fact that Councillor Dundas was with us for a short while. But there are 6 Cabinet members. This sits within, or certainly youth provision sits within the community's portfolio. So it's disappointing that portfolio holder hasn't been able to join us this evening. And in terms of the leader of the council, there is a deputy leader of the council. And I think, in all the time that I was involved in the Cabinet, certainly appearing at the Scrutiny Committee was something we prioritised. And if we made sure that somebody was here, and often there was 2 of us here, sometimes there was 3 of us here, and sometimes there was more. So I think, if I would like to put that on the record, that we would in future like to see Cabinet members present so that we're able to ask those political questions that officers obviously can't answer. So thank you for raising that, Councillor Willits. The other thing I wanted to dwell on for a moment is a comment that Councillor Barton mentioned, which was about statutory responsibility. And during my time at Essex County Council, funding dwindled. At the time when I joined the County Council, we spent 12 million on youth provision. When I finished there, I think we were down to 2 million, 1 million being spent on capital and 1 million spent on revenue. We're using town deal money to refurbish the townhouse. The County Council did continue to invest in the capital of the townhouse, whether you think it's adequate or not, they certainly did. But what was woefully lacking was provision of revenue funding to fund youth workers. And if we look at the difficulties that young people have, a lot of that would be resolved if there's more targeted youth work in our communities to actually engage with young people, and that is what has fallen by the wayside. So I guess my question, Chair, that I wanted to add is about statutory responsibility for youth provision, whether that does indeed sit with the County Council and what their intentions are going forward in terms of youth provision. Basildon Borough Council were also looking to open a youth zone, and as I understand it, that has been knocked on the head as well. We haven't got any, as far as I'm aware, in Essex. The others are predominantly in London. So is there going to be a time when Essex County Council do embrace youth zones and want to support them? And I think us as a local authority needs to know the answers to that question to work out whether we can actually move forward and create a youth zone here in Colchester, but we certainly need Essex County Council's investment to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Those points are helpful. I'll come to officers shortly. I'll add to Councillor Young's questions about what is it at the moment that we have in detail about how this allocation will be spent. Of course, you'll tell us that business cases will be drawn up. but is it a main focus upon the townhouse existing provision? And can we answer Councillor Young's questions in part at all, please?
Chair, I'm not sure that I can answer Councillor Young's questions. I think only Essex County Council can answer Councillor Young's questions. What I would say is I do think in the last few months, conversations have taken place with Essex County Council, with portfolio holders about youth provision, youth services and a youth zone. And I think that the portfolio holder for the county council, or the deputy leader actually, have been to have a look at a youth zone. So, at least they have more information and knowledge about what a youth zone and the benefits of a youth zone bring. I have to say that was only in the last couple of weeks. So, I would have expected us to have some conversations with Essex County Council, certainly at officer level, about what their views were of it, and whether or not they feel that that could be something they could build into their future plans. We would certainly have that conversation. But I do think it's for Essex County Council at political level to determine whether or not youth zones features in their statutory responsibility for youth services, which they clearly have. Can I ask Matthew to pick up the other part?
Thank you, Adrian. So the point on the sort of what happens next in terms of business case and how will that work? That will be developed through those conversations. So as Adrian said, there are member conversations. There are also officer conversations and dialogue that is emerging and is evolving, and that may bear fruit. It may be that the issues that have been outlined earlier, the reasons why youth zone couldn't progress at this point, could be resolved. But I would urge the point that this is a subject to business case, which will be developed over the next 4, 5, 6 months. So by the time we get to the point where we go back to the government with our sort of firm proposals and business cases, there'll be more clarity on exactly how we're going to use that money for the best effect in Colchester. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful, Matthew. So in a sense, in that business case work, if we could iron out some of the problems, then the youth zone is not completely off the table, is what I hear there. I mean, for me, in terms of getting value for money, best case sort of scenario, a youth zone and getting it through this town deal gets us a chunk of the capital, as we have said, a leverage in, but also for the county council as the statutory authority, as Councillor Young says, a youth zone provides half of that revenue. And I do think it's a compelling case. I'll move on. I have Tina and then Nigel. So Councillor Bourne, please.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I may not have agreed with, I might have written a different rationale for the divvying up of funds, but it's not my rationale to write. But it is my rationale to scrutinise, and I think it's a sound rationale that you've followed. You've put out what you want to do, how you're going to prioritise it, and allocated the funds accordingly to the rationale of projects that can be delivered the quickest, with the least amount of delay, and without too much partner extra work. So that's fine. If I was given the choice between a shiny thing in 4 years' time and some youth engagement work now, I'd take the youth engagement work now, because that's what our young people need in Colchester. They need youth work now. There've been, we have young people that have never seen a youth worker, that are now in their 20s, because that's been so long since we had proper youth provision in this borough. We can't leave it just to boxing clubs, kickboxing clubs and uniform services. Actually, we need much more than that. So although I'm disappointed, I do think the youth zone is incredible, absolutely incredible. I'm disappointed that that's not in there and we're not going to be having one yet, or through this vehicle yet. What I am excited about is that you're going to pursue proper youth engagement work through this business case, whatever that looks like. And I'd just like to make a plea that you look at the opportunity for creating sustainable youth worker work there, drawing leaders from the community, taking those young people forward so that they can also have leadership opportunities in the way that we can reach some kind of cycle of benefit rather than young people tapping in and then going out again. We capture that. That would be my plea in the business case as someone that works with young people myself on a daily basis. It's something that they are crying out for, and they can't wait 4 years. We need that now in Colchester.
Thank you. I think those are statements that officers will take back and work with their county council colleagues on. I will move to Councillor Chapman. Please, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, many years ago, I did have a portfolio that included youth work, and I took great interest in it then, and was involved with the, of course, youth awards for a long while afterwards as well. And I was always absolutely staggered how quickly that service did run down. It's very sad, I think. And certainly in the villages, things were told, we were promised things had come to the villages, and they just totally disappeared, and we never saw them at all. So it was a scandalous way of running the show, in my opinion. I do think I do agree with Councillor Bourne. It's better to have some now, even if it's not quite as much as we would have liked. And we've got some money here that we can hopefully work with the county council and provide part of a service that is desperately needed. As I said before, I've been aware over the years of what it can do and what it should do. There's an old adage, prevention is better than cure, and it's much better that we do provide these services to youngsters rather than have to cure all sorts of ills later on. So really it's a question of, just for me to say I fully support the need to continue this work to see how we can take it forward, and perhaps suggest that, I'm not sure whether it can be done, but coming back to Councillor Willett's point, it's needed across the whole of Colchester youth work, not just in the town bid area, and whether that piece of work can include facilities right across the borough, you know, in the towns, Mersey, with no Tiptree and so on, but larger villages, whether you call them what you will, rather than just the Colchester area. I think it's vital that we do pursue that. We've got the will. Everybody seems to be fully supportive of that, and I think if we can keep that goal in the council's mind, then we do need to do what we can over the coming months to get to achieve that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. I see no other indications. I do. Councillor Willits.
Chairman, I mentioned earlier on that this is one of several projects coming along. I hear the disappointment in members of the panel's voices when we hear that the youth zone cannot be included in the project. It would appear that there were two reasons which are probably outside the remit of the town deal board. The lost, in your terminology, the lost million, the one that we've never had, it just doesn't appear, and the other is the matter of the site. We hear that Essex County Council is the statutory authority for the youth provision, but under our general powers of competence, there is no reason why we should not look to our own budget to find the additional £1 million that is not appearing in the town deal budget, and of course the cost of the site. And it really comes down to where one's priorities lie, because the panel could well recommend to Cabinet that the council should consider making a contribution to bring so that we have the full £2.1 million available for improved youth provision. This has been put to the leader of the council, who has said, yes, that is, I remember him saying so at last council meeting, that is possible, but of course, if we transfer £1 million to one of the town deal projects, then it will have to be found, and we will need to target where that is coming from. So just as we've heard the town deal board had to make its priorities, we have to make our priorities. And if it is the wish of the scrutiny panel, we can recommend to Cabinet that we should provide this cash. But it depends whether we want to cut £1 million out of other existing programmes. And I think we have to balance this as a matter of priorities. But I would like to check that it is within our general power of competence to do that if we so wished, because clearly we shouldn't be making a recommendation to Cabinet along these lines if it is not within our general power of competence to provide additional funding from our internal resources to a town deal board project.
Thank you, Councillor Willett. So I think it is within our remit to make that recommendation, but I will go to Adrian Pritchard, please.
Chair, it certainly is. I can confirm that. It is perfectly within our remit to find an additional £1.2 million in addition to the town deal 1 million, if that's what one wanted to do. One would have to think about the 2.1 million bid that you would have to make to the youth services fund. And if that's not successful, are you as a borough council prepared to find that money as well? So that now becomes £3.3 million. Then you need to find the £400,000 worth of revenue funding, which we currently only have in our medium-term financial forecast from 2023 to 2024, but we have no funding for it. We have got to find 1.6 million, nearly £2 million in 23-24 to close our budget gap. If we do that, there is £400,000 in our medium-term financial forecast. But if you ask me today, have we got revenue to be able to put to this project at 400,000? The answer is no.
Chairman, I appreciate that, but it's a matter of priorities. If this project is so important, if the youth zone must go ahead at all costs, and we've echoed our disappointment to the town deal board that we've that it's not, then those savings could be made within our budget. But is it a thing that the scrutiny panel would wish to recommend to Cabinet, recognising the pain that it would cause to other areas of our revenue programme?
Thank you, Councillor Willett. So I think it is something that we could put to Cabinet as a recommendation. We could put to Cabinet that they invest further exploration of council funding into the youth zone to go alongside the funding allocated within the town deal. I think it's within our remit to put that back to Cabinet to explore it further. And they could come back and say, well, it is not able to do. They are unable to put capital and revenue in. That might be the case, but I think it's at least worth putting back to them that we could, after tonight's discussion, we feel that could be a path explored by Cabinet if they believe the priorities can be put that way. So I'd be very happy to put that forward along the lines of investigate further council funding towards a youth zone in line with the town deal contributions to youth provision. So I will put that forward. I mean, we are at the concluding point of this meeting, so I have been writing down suggested recommendations, and I thank you for the contribution there, Councillor Willits. So I would suggest that we have three possible recommendations. The first is the scrutiny panel take on the role of scrutinising the council's part as responsible authority for Colchester's Town Deal Fund, including risk management and scrutiny of financial decisions. And similarly, that we carry out pre-scrutiny of the business cases as they come forward in a timely fashion within the council's format and rules. And thirdly, to investigate further exploration of council funding into the youth zone project alongside the town deal allocation for youth provision. Hopefully that was clear enough for you, Owen, as note taker here. And councillors, I hope that's clear enough. I'm happy to explain those 3 recommendations again, but are there any questions or any further comments on those 3 possible recommendations? The first really is outlining what our role would be. The second is actually the tangible scrutiny of those business cases as they come forward. And the third is to wrap up that last point about youth provision, which we've dwelt on throughout the meeting, but mainly at the end, and between Councillor Willits and I have put that point there. So are we happy with those recommendations, or are there any further comments or further recommendations to add? No more to add, so can I therefore ask that we agree those 3 recommendations? Agreed? Excellent, thank you, Owen, and you've captured those. Thank you all, thank you for that discussion. That really has, I think, helped members of the public, hopefully helped other members. And I thank you, Matthew, for all of the work that you've done so far to get this here. Thank you, Adrian, for coming along and helping explain a lot of the context and the governance involved. And Simon, thank you. Hope to see you again. We don't want to pull you into too much political scrutiny, but being our independent board chair is really appreciated from our point of view. It's appreciated in terms of the work you put in and how you bring together that board, and we want to continue to see you work with momentum. We only scrutinise to help be constructive as best as possible. So thank you and good luck going forward. Thanks for coming this evening. We'll just pause while the guests leave, and then we'll carry on with the rest of the agenda, which is the work programme. Okay, thank you, councillors. I do think that was a very constructive conversation, and we have 3 constructive recommendations. Moving on to item 11, the work programme. Owen, can I turn to you? We have had discussions as the spokespersons about upcoming agenda items, but I'll move to you just to cover that off, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to note that the panel is due to start receiving portfolio holder briefings from cabinet members as of the October meeting onwards. And it would be helpful to get a steer from members either in the meeting now or via group leads and yourself, Mr. Chairman, as to how the panel would like to arrange that and which meetings they would like which portfolio holders to attend. Obviously, we'll work with portfolio holders to try and match the panel's wishes as much as possible. There's some points where you already have items on the work programme there, which would fit naturally with certain portfolio holders. So if members, I would suggest perhaps via group leads and yourself, Mr. Chairman, if members wanted to have those discussions and then bring them forward to us, we can then facilitate portfolio holder attendance as far as possible in line with committee's wishes.
Thank you, Owen. Yes, we achieved consensus between us all as political representatives at the last meeting of the spokespersons to say that we would see all cabinet members, of course, be very inclusive and welcome them all. We would welcome them on items, meeting dates where items relate to their portfolios, which I think we organically were looking at and can make sure we agree as representatives. And I think there was a meeting where we had less on the diary where we thought perhaps the leader could come as that may be a more in-depth scrutiny meeting. So if we can agree to entrust Councillor Chapman, Councillor Bourne and myself as representatives of the panel to just finalise those in that logical way that I've just explained, then hopefully that will work. And in terms of any other items to add on, Owen, did we talk any further about that? I'm trying to recall whether there was anything else to add onto the agenda or whether we'll pick that up as and when it comes forward. I think for me, it would just be when those business cases from the town deals start falling into place, which may be December, January and into February.
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So no other further work programme items or any comments from councillors? So we agree that approach with cabinet members, and we agree that business cases with the town deal will appear towards the end of our municipal year. Okay, all right, we agree the work programme. There's no dissent, so thank you. And that concludes the business of this evening, so I close the meeting. Thank you all. Good night.